Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith, and today we're going to build an interactive dashboard on top of Google Sheets tables. So Google just released this new tables feature, and it's a little more like Airtable. It locks down the column headers, adds some new tools for filtering and sorting data without being able to, screw up the schema and change the column header names. So I was curious to see if these new tables worked with the Google Sheets connector in Appsmith, and it turns out they work the same as a regular sheet, but it gives you a little more structure on the sheet side so that things don't get screwed up and column headers get changed and then your app breaks. So it looks like it could be a better alternative than using a regular spreadsheet, and then you can build an app on top of that. So today we're going to connect to one of those templates and chart the data, create some summaries using JavaScript so that we can see totals per person or per status. And then I want to create an interactive dashboard that lets the user choose which columns to chart by. So let's get started. First, we're going to check out the Google Sheets tables feature and look at some of those templates. And then we'll copy one of those and connect it to Appsmith and start building an app on top of it. All right, let's check it out. Okay, before we head over to Appsmith, first I want to check out this new Google Sheets tables feature. So you go to Insert and then Tables, and there's a ton of different templates here. And these are more structured like Airtable. It's got the column headers that are fixed, and there's some tools in here for each one for the sorting and grouping. It adds the drop downs with colors, so it basically just adds some more structure to it and a better UI. What we're going to do is use one of these templates. I'm going to add some mock data, and then we'll connect to that in Appsmith and build a interactive dashboard. So I'll show you that real quick. Actually, let me go to the template we're going to use first. So I wanted to find one that had a couple different columns that had repeat values, or an enum list if you're working with a database. So here on this project tracker, we've got the status, and we could chart by different statuses or by the priority or the owner, any one of those fields that repeats. So I've got a copy of this one here already started, and I added some mock data. Just wanted to show you where I got that template, and this one has a lot more data in it than the template version. So I'm going to build on top of this, and now let's check out the app. So I'm using those columns, the status, the owner, and the priority here. And I have this interactive dashboard set up to where the user can choose if they want to plot this by priority and see how many are in each priority, or you can go by status and look at the same set of data, but now you're plotting it by how many are in each status. And then here I have a filter set up where I can either look at all tasks and how many each owner has, or I can look at just a certain status. So if I want to see, who's completed the most or who has the most in progress tasks right now. So this gives you a way to access that data securely, share an interactive dashboard with somebody else without giving them direct access to the spreadsheet. And in Google Tables, this really helps lock down that structure. However, you may still not want to share that with certain users, or maybe they just need the high-level reporting data and not direct access to the sheet. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to use this set of mock data and start a new Google Sheets data source. And then once we're connected, we'll use JavaScript to map over the data and get those different totals and put that into the right format for the chart widget. So let's look at the existing app. Just one or two things I want to point out before we start rebuilding this, and I think the rest of it will make more sense when we get into it. If I just show you a few things here that we're working towards first. So each one of these charts, they have a series of data, and the data is in this XY format. So it's an array of objects that have an X and a Y. But our data has different column headers. It's not X or Y. And even if we change the column header, it's still row level data. It's still an individual task, not a total. It's not a count yet. So there's a couple pieces to this. First is you get the data on the client side and then map over it or filter with JavaScript or whatever particular chart you're trying to do. You have to aggregate that data, and then to make it dynamic, you have to be able to pass in the names of the columns that you want to use in order to create those aggregate values. So first, what we'll do is just get the data connected and do one of these kind of hard-coded to just priority. And then we'll look at how to make that dynamic and give the user control over which columns are being plotted. So I'm going to start a new page. And first thing I'm going to do is create a new query connected to that Google Sheets data source. We got another video that shows how to create the Google Sheets data source and connect your sheet. So I'm going to skip past that and just use my existing data source. And check out the link in the description if you're not familiar with that and just need help setting up the connection to Google Sheets. One thing I will say, though, is make sure you choose the option to only connect to the selected sheet instead of all sheets. It's a lot more secure, and then you can disconnect one without breaking other apps. So I like to make a new data source for each spreadsheet. So here we'll use a query to get the tasks, and we will select the sheet. So I'm going to run this, and you can see we're getting the data back. But again, this is row level data. It's not aggregated. And, we could do some formulas in Google Sheets and then try to reference those. But then that is disconnected and the way, it'd be really difficult to make that dynamic. You probably could if you wrote data back to the sheet to find out what type of total they want or which column. But I mean, that would just get clunky. So what we're doing is we're going to map over this data on the client side with JavaScript. But first, let's get it in a table. Let's just look at the data. So I'm going to add a table widget. And we will connect that query that I just created. All right. So now I want a couple charts that will show per person or per status and be able to give us some aggregate data about this. So let's add a couple charts. All right. And then you'll notice the chart has this XY series, like I showed you a minute ago. We have to get something similar to this with an X that is a text value and a Y that's a number. And for this example, I want to get the count of the number of tasks with some value. So we'll pick a column like priority, and then one of the text strings would be P0, P1, and then get the totals for each one. So first we'll hard code that, and then we'll make it dynamic and then do the second chart. So next I'm going to create a new JS object, and we'll just return that same API. Let's see, we'll call it get tasks. And I'm going to return the get tasks data. So right now this function isn't changing anything about it. It's just returning that same data from the get task query. I want to get this tasks by priority. So let's change it to priority. And I'm going to map over this. But first, let's just define this as a constant. And what I want to do is get a total of each priority. So as I'm going through each row, I need somewhere to store that total as I'm accumulating it. So I'm going to start out with an empty object called totals. And then we can loop over the tasks. And each time we get to a certain priority, I'm just going to store the current count and then keep updating that count every time we hit that same priority. And then we can use this object with keys for each one of those priorities. So first, what we'll do is tasks.for each. For each one of these tasks, we want to set the value of totals and then go inside of that totals object to the one that matches the task that we're on. So this task.priority. We want to set the value of that to 1 plus what's already there. So it equals this thing, whatever it happens to already be, plus 1. However, the first time, the very first loop, there's not going to be a priority here of P0 or whatever the value is. So when it goes to check what it's currently equal to here, that's going to fail the first time. So we want to put a fallback value here of 0. And the first time it'll take 0. And then every other time after that, it can start accumulating those totals for each priority. So after that is done, after it goes through all of them, then we'll just return the totals. So let's take a look at this. And you can see that it's taking that P0, the first task that it hits, and it goes to totals.p0 and sets it to 1. So you can see it just goes through the full set, and each time it encounters a priority, it goes to the object, to that nested property for P0, and it just adds it to whatever the current value is. So we have the totals now, but I have to rename these to X and Y, and it should be an array of objects with the X and a Y property, whereas this is a single object. So now that we have the totals there, instead of returning that, what I want to do is get the individual values here and be able to map over them. There's a couple different ways to do it, but I like to use the object entries method. So if you use the object.entries of totals, first let's just take a look at that. This returns an array of arrays, 2D array, where the first value is the X, or what we want to use for X, that's the key, and the second value is the actual value. So we had the key value pairs before, and now we just have an array of 2 values. We can map over this now, and here we'll have an arrow function that's going to return the new array of XY values. The input here is this array, so I'm just going to call it R for array. And what we want to do is return an object with an X property and a Y. Now we're trying to return an object directly in a single line function here, so you have to wrap it in parentheses. That or just make it multi-line and use a return statement. So I want an X and a Y, and the X value is going to come from that array's first element, and then the Y is from the array's second element. So now we're getting back an array of objects with an X and a Y, and there's no duplicates. Whereas the full data set, it's got a bunch of repeats, and it's just going to say the property or the priority, and it's an individual row. So what this is doing is aggregating by the priority and giving us an aggregate total broke down by each priority. So we can put this into our chart now, and let's see, we'll connect it to this first one. So I'm going to clear this out, and we'll reference our JS object function here. All right, so we have a chart of all the tasks by priority. want to clear out some of these labels here that don't apply. And now let's do one for the owner. So on this chart, we'll get a list of the different tasks, or rather the total for each owner. And for this, I'm just going to copy this existing function here. And we'll call it by owner. And then we want to look at the task by owner here. Okay. So if you just want a single chart for a specific purpose, then it's pretty straightforward to do that map and get the data here connected to it. Let's see. It's not seeing my second function yet. I probably have to refresh. But let's try that. Yep, there it is. So we got two charts, two different aggregate columns, and that's pretty easy. It doesn't take much JavaScript to do that little bit of it. But now we want to make it dynamic. Okay, so right now this is hard-coded to only chart the priority. Let's make this one dynamic to where it can do priority or status. So I'm going to add a radio group. There's a couple different widgets you could use for this one, but this makes it to where they can only select one option. And I don't want to give them, it just wouldn't make sense to try to plot them both at once. So I need to change this to select between priority and status. And you can either rename it right here or switch to JS and look at the actual structure that's feeding this, the options for this. So again, it's an array of objects. And here they have a label and a value where the value can be different, but it doesn't really matter. They can be the same. In this case, I think I want priority and status for both of them. Okay, so we can choose between those. I'll make the default selected priority just so that there's something there when the page first loads. And let's change the label to chart by. Okay, so now we want to take the value from this radio group and reference that in the function that's parsing over all of this and giving us the totals. So our first one, task by priority, what I want to do is, instead of using the word priority here, we want to have a parameter that we can reference, and the user's changing that value. So that's the X field. And then the Y field is just a count in this case. You could do an average or total or, min or max or whatever you want to do. We're just keeping it simple and getting a count. So the only dynamic part is which field is for X, and then Y is always going to be a count. Now, I'm going to set this to have a default of our radio button selected value. So you can see it's showing priority here, the selected value right now in the radio group. This will let the user change that. And then we'll use this variable name here in place of priority. But it's a variable, not the actual property name. So I have to use bracket notation and get rid of that period. So same thing here. Put that in brackets and the variable name and get rid of the period. And so that should be working again. But now we can change it and pick a different field. So what we're doing is displaying the output of that function. And if the inputs to the function change, then the UI will update. So just by changing this to status, that function reruns, and now the columns become the names of each status instead of the names of each priority. In either case, we're just getting a count of the number of tasks. So we have that one working dynamically. Now let's do the owners here. So I'll grab a select for this one. And right now it's showing the total of tasks for everyone, and it's not looking at any one status. What I want to do is change this filter so that you can look at only the in progress, but then see everybody, or only the ones that are complete and see everybody's. So I have a drop down already with all those statuses typed out on the other page. I'm not going to do that again. Just going to go grab these values here. And I've added one extra value of all. So we're going to make it to where you can select a single status and filter all the data and see that charted, or choose all. And then that should give you no filter and just show the total of all of them. So let me copy that and back to the page we're working on. Okay, so we'll change this to JS and paste in our options here. And the select widget has these options to change which property names feed the label and the value. I named mine label and value, so just lining that up. And then for the default, I'll go with all. And I'm going to make this required just so I don't have to deal with it being blank too. We could use blank for all, but just to be a little more clear about what it does. So we've got this value here. Let me give it a label. This one. We want to say this is status filter. Okay. So similar to the first example here, we just updated that existing function. I got to tie in the value here from the select widget to the function that's generating this chart now. So we've got two different functions. They're real similar. And this one is showing data from our chart by owner. Get task by owner. Here we go. So now I want to filter this data. Right here, I'm defining tasks as just coming from that API. I'm going to filter it right here. And I only want to return the tasks where the task.status equals the value in that select. But then if it is set to all, then I want to return the task no matter what. So the condition is it matches or the selected value is equal to all. And the rest of the functions should be the same. We're still going to do this one by owner. We're not making it dynamic as far as which column. We're dynamically filtering the data set. So two slightly different options. I wanted to show a couple different ways that you can make this interactive. So now that should be the same as before because it's set to all right now, but we should be able to change it. So it looks like I have 6, Kevin's got 7 here, and Ron's at 6. Let's look at only in progress. There we go. So you can see that it's rescaled everything too. The height looks the same, but that's the new max. It's at 3 now. So this gives you an interactive way to share that data and let users explore it and drill down. And you can even do click events like, actually, yeah, let's go ahead and add this little bit. I hadn't planned on this part, and I didn't put it in the first page that I built, but I want to make it to where we can select a person here and take the click event from the chart and then filter this table down here. So I could write the filter right here as part of the table, the data binding, and it'll work, but that gets a little tight typing it right there. So I'm going to write this in a different function, and you can see this is connected directly to the API. The table is just coming straight from that. What I want to do is make a new function for the table. So tasks table, and we'll have this return the get tasks data. I think I hit return too quick. There it is. So I'm just going to swap this out, and it's basically the same thing at this point. Just as a starting point, I'm replacing, there we go. So I'm just replacing the direct binding to the API with a function in the middle, and now we have somewhere to write that logic. So that's working again. Now we can write a filter based on the selected data point. Each chart, I should name these because we'll get them mixed up, which one's chart 1 and 2 when we're referencing it in the code. So chart by owner, and this one is by priority or status. So I'll just say by column. Okay, so now let's make that filter here based on the chart. So we'll return the data.filter. Let's filter each task where the task.owner equals, and then that was chart owner, and we're looking at the selected data point dot x. So the x is the text one, the label, and then the y is the number or the count in this case. And I think that'll get it if as long as there's a value selected. But when we unselect, I think we're going to need to do something like this for a fallback condition. But let's test it out. So let's see. It says there's 7 records here. Oh yeah, and they're all Kevin already. So if I select me, then there's mine. Okay. Can I unselect? Looks like I cannot unselect. It doesn't change on the second click. But if I refresh, there's not going to be one selected. Let's see what happens there. Yeah, I thought so. So the data is blank at first because there is no selected data point. So we need a condition in that filter just in case that there is no selected data point. And I'm going to use optional chaining here as well, because if there is no X, that's going to have an error when it tries to find that path. So we'll have a fallback value and say that if this is undefined, we can just invert that and that becomes true. So either find the tasks with the matching owner of the selected data point, or just return everything if this is true. So the idea here is that this is undefined, and then we're inverting that and it becomes true. Let's see if that did it. So it's working at first once a data point has been selected, but when we refresh and there is no selected data point, let's make sure that works. Cool. Okay, we got the full set, and then we can filter it by person. So we've got 3 different types of filters here now. You can choose the column to aggregate data by, or you can filter the set of data and then aggregate it. And then here we're looking at just a row level filter. So filtering the individual data set and looking at the row level details, whereas up here we have some dynamic options to see aggregate data. Well, all right. I think that's it for this week. That's about everything I wanted to show. Even added in a little bit of extra there at the end. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions or ideas for future workshops, feel free to drop a comment below. Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.